So as I sit down to record this podcast, the date is December the 12th, 2024. And in an astonishing turn of events, I have actually managed to record another podcast within a week of recording the previous one. Uh, it's embarrassing to admit it, but I haven't been able to do that now for a couple of years, and now I've been able to do it. Actually starts to make this thing feel like more like a real thing. And I can't help but feel, but a person couldn't have possibly found a better time to do it. Because right now, the Edmonton Oilers are absolutely cooking. I mean, this was a team at the start of this season, looked an awful lot like the team at the start of last season. It's just extremely frustrating, not winning, doesn't have a whole lot going on. And now this team has jumped from being, in the past few weeks, this team has gone from a team that was just only barely playing 500 hockey to now a team that is well above 500 hockey and is starting to get well on their way towards looking like a team that is going to contend to win the Stanley Cup this season. Now, it's hard to have any complaints about that. It's definitely hard to make any real critiques about a team that is going on like a run like the one that the Edmonton Oilers are having right now. But as it just so happens, I have managed to think of one. And it actually has a little something to do with something that happened over the summer. Not really so much, directly involving the team, but basically I got sent a book over the summer. The book was written by a gentleman by the name of Douglas Savage. And the book is called My New Hero. And basically what the book is about, it's actually about this guy's experiences about being a hockey fan in Winnipeg, of all places, and how a guy who was a Winnipeg Jets fan managed to become an Edmonton Oilers fan, and more notably a Wayne Gretzky fan, by way of this encounter that he had with Wayne Gretzky in about 1983. Generally, the story of it is that during the 1983 playoffs, he runs into Wayne Gretzky while Wayne Gretzky is on his way out of the building. And he manages to just kind of like, it perfectly falls into place that Wayne Gretzky on that particular day, instead of getting on the bus and riding on the bus with all the other players back to the hotel where they're staying at, he decides that he would rather walk. Which, I mean, obviously it almost sounds demented by today's standards. I mean, imagine if Connor McDavid, one day, it's a lovely day, and he just decides that he would rather walk home, from the arena from Rogers Place, rather than drive, or somewhere off on the road somewhere. He decides that he'd rather walk to the hotel rather than take the bus. He would get absolutely mobbed. There would be no end to it. Not only would he get mobbed, I mean, by the people that were already on the street. Social media, they would distribute that all over the place, and he would get mobbed. There would be people that would travel to wherever the hell he is to basically mob him. I mean, actually, I think that we did see that last year during the playoffs. There was that incident where he was trying to he was in between playoff rounds, and they had a couple of days. And he decided that he was going to have some of the players over to his house to have a couple of drinks and relax in between, in between playoff series. And he went to an Edmonton area liquor store, to buy a bunch of beers. And people actually they tweeted out his location, and people actually came down to the liquor store, and they were bothering him while he was trying to load up all of this beer into his SUV. It's very strange to me that the staff didn't offer to help him. I feel like if you encounter Connor McDavid loading a bunch of beers into the back of his SUV at a liquor store, it seems to me kind of odd that you wouldn't offer to help him, rather than pull out your cell phones and, taking video of yourselves basically sitting on the street screaming while Connor McDavid is standing there looking very annoyed. That's what would happen now if something like that was attempted. But all the way back in 1983, things were a little bit different. It was the kind of thing that a player could get away with. back in those days. I kind of wish that things were a lot more like that. Now, 40 years later. Now, unfortunately, they're not. But anyhow, so to continue with the story, just kind of in brief, because I do really recommend that everybody go and get their hands on a copy of this book. You can get it on Amazon. But to kind of give you a brief rundown of the story, I mean, basically, he gets to accompany Wayne Gretzky on his walk home, asks him if he can. Gretzky says, yeah, sure. And so he does. And so they're walking back to the hotel and they get to talking. And eventually, Wayne Gretzky makes a very interesting promise to this young kid. And he basically says that, you know what? If we win the game tomorrow night to win this playoff series against the Winnipeg Jets, I'm going to give you my stick. But only if we win. And so it seems like a very, very kind gesture towards this player, from this player towards this kid who's actually, the fan of the team that Gretzky is playing against in this playoff series. But therein lies the sheer, the mastery of the mental gamesmanship that I think that Wayne Gretzky had. He figured out how he could get the home team's fans cheering for him rather than their own team. I mean, I don't want to cast into question Douglas's loyalty to the Winnipeg Jets organization, because I feel like he is definitely, I feel like he definitely is very loyal to the Winnipeg Jets. But I think that in a sense, like as much as, Wayne Gretzky, they had that, they had that one moment of connection, and it was a very special moment of kindness towards this young fan. I kind of feel that to a certain extent, Wayne Gretzky, he was playing a bit of a mental game there. And I do think that it did pay some dividends. It probably didn't help the Edmonton Oilers win that playoff series, as much as anything else that happened on the ice. But I do kind of feel like there was a small advantage that was kind of shifted in the Edmonton Oilers' direction when he managed to kind of poach this fan, from the home team club. I definitely don't want to diminish, I definitely don't want to in any way diminish Douglas's experience with Wayne. But I kind of feel like that was something that was definitely going on there. And it's not even the only time that Wayne Gretzky ever played a very subtle little mental game that managed to kind of, reap some benefits, kind of managed to tilt fortune in their favor just a little bit. One in particular that I think about in the 1988 playoffs. So the 1988 playoffs, I don't think that anybody really saw it coming what was going to happen. I mean, for one thing, the Edmonton Oilers, they didn't even win their division that year. That particular year, their division was won by the Calgary Flames, their hated arch rivals from down south. And not only did the Flames win the division, they won the conference. They won the President's Trophy. So going into the playoffs, theoretically, they were supposed to be the favorite to win the Stanley Cup. And it seemed almost absurd at the time, but in an opening round playoff series, the Edmonton Oilers were going to be the visiting team. They weren't going to have home ice advantage, at least not from the first game. But then instead, something happened. And the Edmonton Oilers, they wound up just going on an absolutely ungodly, dominant run that year. I mean, as everybody knows, it takes 16 wins for a team to win the Stanley Cup. That year, the Edmonton Oilers did it in just 18 games. I mean, that is an absolutely unreal, almost unrivaled playoff run. And it all started, of all places, in the Saddle Dome in Calgary. And so Edmonton, they had to go to overtime to win the second game. It wasn't as if they just steamrolled, every single game. They had to work very hard, from game to game, even to go on that dominant run. But in game two, they had to go to overtime to win it. And so the game goes to overtime. Who should happen to win to score the winning goal, but none other than Mr. Wayne Gretzky himself. So he scores that goal, and then he looks over in the corner and he sees the guys that are on the Calgary Flames ice crew, and he says to them, "Yeah, you can take the ice out. Like, go ahead, take the ice out." And then he skates back to leaves the building. It's kind of uncharacteristic of Wayne to actually do something like that. Because one of the things that Wayne Gretzky said was that, when you win, say nothing. When you lose, say less. It's one of his famous quotes. But in this particular case, he did have something to say on that night, and it was something like, "Hey, you guys are done. You guys aren't going to need this ice anymore. We're going to go back to Edmonton, and we're going to wrap this up." And they did. They wound up sweeping that series. And so the Calgary Flames, who were supposed to be the favorite to win the Stanley Cup, starting that playoff bracket that year, they're out in 4 games. Yeah, they only needed their ice for 2 of a possible 7 games in the first round. And so the question that I'm going to ask you is, this was reported on later on, by guys that were on that Calgary Flames ice crew. They basically told everybody what Wayne Gretzky had said to them. So obviously it was not something that was kept under wraps. I do kind of feel like that must have been something that was shared with the team. And while they probably expected the Flames to be really motivated by this, instead, it kind of seems like it had the opposite effect. Wayne Gretzky was able to kind of deflate the Calgary Flames, the President's Trophy champions, the NHL regular season champions, and he was able to deflate them enough that the Oilers were able to defeat them in 4 games. Like, no Stanley Cup for you yet. That wouldn't happen until the next season, after Wayne was already gone out of Edmonton. Then the Flames were finally able to break through and win, their so far only Stanley Cup. But no, in 1988, it was not happening for them. And so I'm going to kind of circle back to where I started here, because I know that I started out this segment by talking about I was going to offer this as a critique on the Edmonton Oilers season, almost as like a criticism. I guess you could go so far as to say that. And so why am I sitting here talking about something that Wayne Gretzky was so good at, rather than, something that this team is not very good at? Well, I have over the years had my fair share of critiques about Connor McDavid. I do think that all of them are valid, and I do think that all of them are fair. But in this particular instance, what I'm kind of zeroing in on is there does seem to be a deficit in Connor McDavid's ability to play these mental games. One way or the other, these little psychological, subtle little head games that will frequently get played during the playoffs, during the season. It doesn't really seem to me like Connor McDavid really spends a whole lot of time playing them. And if he is, it doesn't really seem like he quite has the knack for it. And I do think that this is actually something that, if he could acquire that one way or another, could actually turn out to be very helpful for this team. But not only does he, not seem to have, quite that knack of how to influence the other team psychologically. He doesn't even at times it kind of feels like he doesn't even have the ability to influence his own team quite the way that a player with his responsibilities as captain really ought to be. There's now that now famous clip of him after Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals against the Florida Panthers this past year, where they've just lost Game 2, and he's in the locker room and he is just screaming at the rest of the team, basically telling them, come on, this is the Stanley Cup. We are playing for the Stanley Cup. Like we cannot, we cannot be down 2 games, and we can't go down a third. But then what happened in Game 3? They went to Game 3 and they lost again. They did go down 3 games. And yes, they did come back and win 3 straight and force the series to 7 games. And yes, they did come within 1 goal of winning that game. But one of the things that was said after that series was concluded, when somebody asked Leon Draisaitl, it's like, well, hey guys, what did you learn here? And Draisaitl just kind of said, well, don't go down 3-0 in the Stanley Cup final. Yeah, okay, that is obviously not a great answer. But I do kind of feel like if the team had responded appropriately, to Connor McDavid after Game 2, then they wouldn't have gone down 3 games. They might have won the Stanley Cup in 6 if they had just responded to him after Game 3. But it does seem like a lot of the time, this team just does not seem to respond to Connor McDavid's leadership. And I don't know what else to say about that. I feel like if a player can't psychologically influence his own teammates, then he's going to have a hell of a time trying to accomplish that feat with the other team. And I think that if you take a look at a lot of the things that, what does separate Connor McDavid from Wayne Gretzky, there are more than a few things. But I think that this element of the psychological in the game is something that I just don't see there with Connor McDavid nearly so much as you can see it with Wayne Gretzky. And I do think that it is something that holds this team back a little bit. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure exactly what the answer to that is. Because I feel like this could be one of those things where it's like, you either have that gift or you don't have it. Right now, I think every indication is that Connor McDavid doesn't have it. So then how do you fill that void? Well, maybe you fill that void by bringing in a player that does have that ability. I mean, God knows that guys like Matt Tkachuk, they, unfortunately for us, they do seem to have it in spades. And of course, I'm not saying that Matt Tkachuk is a better player than Connor McDavid. Obviously, I would never, ever say that. But I certainly do think that it's plausible to say that maybe this team would be a little bit better off if Connor McDavid had a little bit more rat in him.